Good morning, everybody from around the world. Welcome this morning to TAD Talks, part of Tadatmya Sangha, and I am Yugal Kishore Das, one of your co-hosts, along with Bhakti Rasa. And this is our third podcast in which we are hosting a wonderful devotee coming in all the way from the other side of the world, Bali, Indonesia, Radhamadhava Prabhu. And Radhamadhava is I think, a longtime friend of Swadmi Padmanabha, and it's been a pleasure getting to know him just over the last few weeks and a few months. So today, our topic for discussion is vulnerability. And without further ado, I'd love to welcome Radhamadhava to tell us the title of the talk and why that was important for you and for us today to discuss.
Haribo, thank you for having me today. It's very exciting to be with you and to talk about this very important topic. So, the main title is Vulnerability, the Eternal Treasure, even for God. So, it's always a topic that needs some introduction because many people are not so adept in it. They don't really know what it is. It's a little bit of a touchy subject for some, and there's even some stigma around it, especially for men, I guess. And so, yeah, we'll have a little introduction in the beginning, but basically, what we're going to then soon enter into is to exemplify how even Krishna, in his pastimes, is relishing being vulnerable, especially in his form as Sri Chaitanya. But in the beginning, we'll have a look into how that plays out, even in Krishna Lila. So, just to get some exemplification in our comfort zone, right? Where we already are anchored in comfort. And then we'll also venture into a little bit more vulnerable spheres. So yeah, I think it's a very, very important topic that deserves much more than a discussion, but I hope we can touch at least a little bit and scratch on the surface.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
well,
Radhamadhava.
yeah, we'll kick it off. This is every discussion has, and this is a continuation of one that had happened prior. Padmanabha Maharaj brought it to the surface, and now we'll continue and then we'll kick it downhill from here.
And of course, vulnerability is kind of the first pillar in Swami's radical personalism. Kind of everything begins there, you might say.
Yeah, it's so important. Like, it's just extremely underrated. And that's why it's so important that we open up the discussion about vulnerability. Because unless you open up, and vulnerability really means to, let down your guard with people who are able to empathize and then be able to open up your heart. So that's, one of the most important six loving exchanges amongst the Vaishnavas. And that's how we relate. That's how we have Sadhu Sangha, and Sadhu Sangha being the actual most important limb of bhakti, how we get perfection, right? And so, yeah, Guhya Makyati Prichati, to have these very, very open, raw, vulnerable discussions where we actually talk about what really, really bothers us, what really, really is important to us, intimate discussions. And that's all about vulnerability. So true.
Yeah, if we want to enter the hearts of the sadhus, which is something that we do, then we need to first expose our own heart also and allow them
Yeah,
to enter. So that's part of vulnerability as well.
totally. Yeah. I mean, I remember, just to give an example, my Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhakti Vallabh Tirtha Maharaj, I was very, like shy to open up in front of him because there was always a queue of devotees in front of his place, and then, darshan times. And then I was a sevak, and I had like quite close contact with him for years. But then in the beginning, right in the beginning, before I even, joined the Sevak team, during the Darshan times, he repeatedly told me, you can divulge,
Hmm.
you know. He always asked me, how are you? And I just said like a general answer. But then he told me, you can divulge. And it was so accommodating, so welcoming, so vulnerable, you know. He really wanted me to open my heart to him in a very vulnerable way. And that's exactly what Sadhu Sangha really is all about, you know.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And you mentioned the word darshan time. So that's what darshan is. It's allowing ourselves to be seen completely. It's not us going before God or the guru and seeing the guru. It is being seen by them. And to be able to be seen by them, like you said earlier, we have to really let down our guard, open up, let them in. So it is a huge exchange, and for me, it's the basis of relationship, of real relationship.
Totally. Totally. And even with pure devotees, sometimes we forget about that. We think, oh, pure devotees, they can actually see our heart. That's true, although only partially, but it is true. And with Guru Maharaj, I felt it. He can actually see my heart. He can see what's in there. But he nevertheless wanted me to open up my heart to him because it's an active participation, and that's what's really required, you know. It has to be personal, you know. So
And wouldn't you
therefore it
say,
is the ABC, you know, of spiritual progress, really.
Yeah.
and wouldn't you say that, you know, for this to be personal and relational, that it's not just the one on the lower platform. It's not just the disciple or the um beginner or something that is expected to divulge, but really, permission to divulge is really understood when the more advanced person takes that initial step. For me, in my experience, I mean, early, yes, those first monks and brahmacharis that I met, you know, um, they were making themselves vulnerable just by welcoming me into their space, into their life. But, now this second go, if I can call it that, with Swami Padmanabha, if it wasn't for him bearing his own wound in a way that, was held space for others and yet didn't, maybe didn't overly focus on his own wound either. It seems like maybe there's a balance between exposing, but not oh, I don't know, sitting in, like, staying in the wound.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Totally agree with that. And it's unfortunately, there is some stigma around it, especially when it comes to so-called pure devotees, because then suddenly we have the expectation that they are perfect,
Mhm.
even in a material sense, that they are superhumans, and superhumans should not be humans, you know, mind you, right? So how can they be vulnerable? So then there's a stigma expectation, you know, we have this expectation, oh, they shouldn't be like that, so we don't even expect it. So they also reciprocate to that to some extent, but then they don't. And then we're like, what to do with it, right? I mean, I happen to, be blessed to have had the company of some really far out pure devotees. And when they get vulnerable, it's so beautiful. It's like so heartwarming. But they also don't do that in public because we will talk
Mhm.
about that more. You have to know when to do it with whom. You can't just do that anywhere and all the time, yeah, right? You don't want to do like soul striptease, you know what I'm saying? So for it, especially for the sadhus, because they're also extreme, they're actually the most vulnerable people, right? So they want to make sure that, they also can be received properly. And so we have to be also qualified to reciprocate with that.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
always
I
both
can
sides, you know?
Exactly.
I, I can only imagine that if one was to sort of fake their position, that the public nature of sannyas ashram they would crumble eventually. That charade couldn't last forever. So it's like being understanding where one's at and
Yeah.
how much publicity, how public, how open can I be today? You know, I like
Totally.
that question. Swami asks about who is Krishna for you today. So it's like, how vulnerable can I be today?
Yeah. All right, Radhamadhav, I know you have some idea of things that you would like to present, so we'll let you go with that now.
Thank you, Bhakti Rasa. So I wanted to talk about the core essential instructions of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Shikshashtakam, because we've been talking about this and we heard about this also from Swami Padmanabh in his presentations, how he is the most vulnerable Lord. And I think it's so, valuable to talk about that in details. It's a real eye opener. And I wanted to start off before we go into the Shikshashtakam with having darshan of a painting that I found in the in a temple in Vrindavan that's also part of the Goswamis of the Radharaman temple. And so I had the fortune that Padmanabh Goswami, not Swami, Padmanabh Goswami from the Radharaman temple, he allowed me to take a picture of it. So I'm very grateful to him because it's really one of my absolute favorite painting. And so, yeah, let's have a look at it. And I won't say much about it before we see it because it's always the first impression that, is very special for many people. So let's have a look.
While you're pulling that up, I just want to welcome Sweta Dweep Radhika into the space in the spirit of personalism. You know, maybe as people come in, we can just say hello to them. And then, of course, when we come to the end of the hour, we open up into a full discussion.
So what we see here is a typical Vrindavan setting. You can see the Yamuna, you can see the temples here in the background, the river's embankment of the Yamuna. You can see the typical Kadamba trees that, by the way, also stand for the ecstatic horripilations on the goosebumps, right? On the skin of Krishna, Radha, and also Mahaprabhu, whose complexion is also compared to the fruit of a Kadamba tree. And here, sitting beneath this Kadamba tree, is Radharani, and to her lotus feet, kneeling, is Krishna, right? So this composition, by the way, is very, very similar to the composition of the small painting that's being worshipped in Sevakunj. If you've ever had darshan of the Sevakunj main temple in Vrindavan, which is really the heart of Vrindavan, right? Because in Sevakunj, Krishna attains his most cherished goal in his life, which is service to Radharani. That's why it's called Sevakunj, right? So, and here, very, very relevant is that in that small painting, it's really hard to make out what's happening. Usually the people tell that Krishna is massaging Radharani or whatever. But here you can see, I mean, it's, of course, there's unlimited diversity. It's not just one pastime there, but this is very, very typical and very, very telling about what Krishna really, really wants to do in the core of his heart. Here you see there's some things lacking on Krishna's head. What is it?
His crown is down.
Yes, exactly. His crown is down.
Feather.
What else?
Peacock feather.
Mm.
Peacock feather missing, right? And
No
what's usually
flute in hand.
tucked in his dhoti is something missing here too, right?
His flute.
His flute is missing, right? And also his garland, right? So where are they? They are here at the lotus feet of Radharani, and Krishna himself has placed them there in a complete mode of surrender. And you can see even his very, very soft and gentle gaze is not even directly looking at Radharani, but slightly away to the space in front of her lotus feet, not even directly looking at her feet, but to the space in front of her lotus feet. We'll maybe come back later to why that is so. And even Radharani also in her mood of bashness here, you see bashfulness is clearly expressed with her gesture of, shyness here. This is not saying, Krishna, please go away. This is a gesture of shyness, right? If we picture, a typical
The
girl.
mudra that she's holding there.
Sorry?
This mudra she's holding, her hand kind of.
Yeah. It's not like a blessing mudra or a gesture of like pushing him out of the kunj, which is also possible. But here it's very clearly a gesture of shyfulness, of bashfulness. Because why? Something extremely vulnerable is happening, right? So Krishna is really, really opening up all the deeper and deeper levels, layers in his heart to Radharani, what he really, really wants to do. And he's pulling down all the guards here. And Radharani, for her, it takes a lot to allow him to do that, because usually what we see in the Radha Krishna paintings is just the opposite, right? This is like a paradigm shift. Usually we see Radharani at the feet of Krishna. In all the standard books of bhakti, usually this is what's described, right? And so here it's like, well, wait a minute, why do they actually shift here? Why do they change the positions? So this has very, very deep significance in Krishna Lila. If you go to the deeper layers of Krishna Lila, where Krishna really, really is the most vulnerable person. And that's what really happens in Seva Kunj, especially if you go to Seva Kunj via Imlitala, because in Imlitala, Krishna becomes the servant of Radharani through really, really learning about the mood of devotion, right? So, and that's like an initiation.
Say more about Imlatala. I know you've written something on this recently, or
Yes.
a future publication maybe.
Yes. We just published a book by Bhakti Sharanga Goswami Maharaj, who is a direct disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada. And he has, given us a wonderful meditation in Vitala. It was published only in Bengali and in Hindi, and the English translation was no more available. So we had the pleasure to translate that with some friends of mine, and I helped editing the translation. And in that work, I was able to collect a lot of nectar from hearing from seniors. And then I thought, I have to share this as well. So I wrote a commentary, and in there we go really, really deep about this topic. I won't be able to, really present a lot here, but just maybe the gist of it. So the gist of it is that in Imlitala, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu 500 years ago spent every single morning chanting there in seclusion. And also in the same place. So why, he hasn't done that anywhere else in Vrindavan, because he stayed in Vrindavan only 3 to 4 months. And so this shows that there's a deep significance right there in Imlitala. And that is because 5,000 years ago in Krishna Lila, not in Gaur Lila, Radharani, she was crowned the queen of Vrindavan right there. And that's where she got the name Vrindavaneshwari. There were also different places where she, enjoyed that pastime, but Imlitala is very important for us, because when Krishna was in separation of Radharani, I won't get into why that. You can read that in the book. It's downloadable on Amazon. You can just enter Imlitala Mahatmya and you'll find it there. So when Krishna was in separation from Radharani, then he took shelter under this tree and not any other tree, because he remembered this is where Radharani was crowned, the queen of Vrindavan. And so he started to chant her name there. Radhe, Radhe, please reveal yourself to me. And again, you see, this is an extremely vulnerable pastime. Krishna crying in desperation. So, usually this is not like a typical topic for the Sunday class, like we tell them, oh, Krishna is Bhagavan, the supreme personality of Godhead. And in the Gita, we hear, Sri Bhagavan Uvach, and then he's telling us how it is, But here, Krishna,
Omnipotent.
yeah, exactly, omnipotent,
Omni.
omniscient, right? But here, Krishna is in complete desperation. And he's eager to meet Radharani again. And so in that pastime, Radharani then also, opens up her treasure house, which is, of course, her mood of service, Radhabhav, which is the thing that Krishna doesn't have and wants to relish. That's why, of course, he appeared as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to relish the mood of Radharani and thus become his own servant and learn the art of devotion. And then, once and only when he fully embodies that vulnerable space of service, of bhakti, then only he can truly enter Seva Kunj, right? Because now, before that, before his initiation, so to say, he is still in his previous mode. And what's his previous mode? Govindam Adipurusham Damaham Bhajami. That's how we worship him, as Adipurusham, as the supreme enjoyer. But here he tells Radharani, I'm no more Adipurusham. Yeah, I am your servant. And look, I surrender to you my everything, my Murli, my most beloved Murli. Yeah, my garland, my beloved moorpunk, my peacock feather, my very self, my identity, everything that makes me me, right? I surrender unto you. I give myself completely unto you. So extremely vulnerable. And only in this spirit of servitude and vulnerability can Krishna truly enter Seva Kunj, and can he truly, really, really do judgment to what Seva Kunj is all about, which is service to Radharani. And so he's no more Adipurusham. Now he is Radha Das. He's the servant of Radharani, Radha Dasa. And of course, that's no one else but Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So the two are really identical here, especially in the innermost core, right? And Krishna is in this space of service in Krishna Lila, right? So this is the correlation. And I thought it would be a wonderful intro, this darshan, just to directly have a look and a taste, get a taste of what vulnerability is, even in Krishna Lila, where we may not expect it, but it's there in so many ways. And so, I mean, look at even Krishna's hands, how they become tiny, and almost like Jagannath's arms, almost like shrinking into his body. And compare Krishna's hands with Radharani's hands, who are much bigger here in this painting. So again, it's all about vulnerability here.
And it's kind of interesting too, like the things that separate, not separate, but distinguish Krishna from Vishnu are peacock feather, flute, and the devotees. So all of these things Krishna is surrendering to Sri Radha. So as Mahaprabhu, he surrenders his devotees to Sri Radha also. He gathers up the hearts and brings them into, exposes them to Radha Bhav. So all of these, so it really, really what you're saying is so exemplified here, because it's really Krishna surrendering his Krishnaness, his whole self to Sri Radha. And that is what vulnerability is all about. Surrendering, opening up our true self and offering that. And it's beautiful, Radhamadhava.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bhakti Rasa. And again, like Gora Lila inspires Krishna Lila, Krishna Lila inspires Gora Lila. So we should never forget that we can't understand one without the other. So when we cherish Gora Lila, and especially when we really go into its essence of what Krishna's innermost desires are, and how they are fulfilled in Gaur Lila, then we have always we have to remind ourselves of this Krishna, right? It's this Krishna who actually is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his innermost essence, right? And so it's so important that we have this darshan always in the core of our heart when we contemplate the essence of Gaur Lila as well, because of course Gaur Lila really is the inner explanation of Krishna Lila, and you cannot really understand also Krishna Lila in its essence without understanding Gaur Lila in the sense of that Krishna really ultimately wants to serve Radharani. And I'm not excluding other sampradayas here, because there are other sampradayas in Braj. We should also be aware of that, who very much are grasping this mood of Krishna who wants to serve Radharani as well. Many practitioners, I have to be honest, even grasp this more than many of our practitioners. So it's not excluding also other sampradayas here. So I want to be clear about that, but it's a universal thing, right? So
Yes.
Gaur Lila really can also be cherished in Krishna Lila if you know how, if you know the art of doing that. You see even Gaur Krishna, right? Gaur Krishna is the golden Krishna here. Krishna even has almost a golden hue. You can see he's no more totally, bluish blackish here, but almost has a golden complexion here, right? Yeah.
So I wonder, what are their ages at this point in the Leela? So if we have, yeah, you mentioned that Radha had already been crowned Queen of Vraj. Could they be identified as at a particular stage in life at this point? And I ask that question in part because sometimes it seems like vulnerability changes over the course of our life. Like, oh yes, it's natural to be vulnerable early in the beginning. We're born, we're naked, we're exposed. And then as we grow older and we become sort of more mature, again, the common thinking is that vulnerability may go down, may reduce towards the peak of life.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Well, to really do justice to this, particular perspective, we have to also understand that it's a historical development, because different sampradayas, they have different perceived eternal um, most cherished ages of Radha and Krishna, depending on their mood, depending on their rasa, depending on their historical approach. So of course, in our sampradaya, Radharani is 13, and Krishna is 14 usually. Depends also on your mood, right? I mean, there are some extreme examples where I know a wonderful devotee who has, a mood of being Krishna's son, right? So of course Krishna would be much older. So and he's a Gaudiya Vaishnava, right? So but usually the archetype age for us, Gaudiya Vaishnavas is 13 and 14 years respectively. And it's true that after, when Krishna ages more, of course, ultimately, he goes to Mathura, Dwarka, and what have you. There, he seems to be less vulnerable because, he's more in the mood of a kshatriya, not in the mood of Raseshwar anymore. And so, yeah, naturally, that's what you would expect, of the typical scene of the battlefield in Kurukshetra and what have you, right? But here really their age is around this age for us especially, and definitely not much more than that. And we also have to remember that Krishna and Radharani, they are younger compared to our age in terms of maturity. So when they are 13 and 14, for us, that translates into a slightly older age in terms of maturity, right? So that also is a consideration that's important. But yes, they're definitely in the age where still this childlike innocence is still very much present. And yes, in this childlike presence is actually very helpful to be able to embody vulnerability. And like you were saying, Yugal Kishore, when we become more mature, we tend to lose that ability. And that's a shame, because real maturity will allow us to keep on embodying vulnerability. And we have to sometimes be able to retrace that skill and again, learn to embody that later on, right? It's just so important. Thank you for adding that to the discussion.
I have a quick thing too that just came is like Hugo said, that vulnerability changes shape as we progress through life. It'll have a different shape. But adolescence is kind of known as, the period of existential guilt, not guilt, but existential crisis, where we're really trying to figure out who it is that we are. So that is an incredibly emotionally vulnerable time. So vulnerability speaks of of knowing ourself and bringing ourself and showing all of our parts and bits. Usually in adolescence, we want to hide, we want to just put a good face forward. So adolescence is like it's such a vulnerable, consciously vulnerable time. When we're babies, yes, it's vulnerable, but it's more in a physical way. But this emotional rawness that happens in adolescence that I think is tied in with trying to figure out who it is that we are and all of those things and bringing that to the surface. So that might be have something to do with Krishna's and Sri Radha's vulnerability during these kind of pastimes where they are normally portrayed as adolescents. It's a very emotionally vulnerable time.
Yes, totally. Totally. Thank you, Bhakti Rasa. And it really is like we believe that this is really the archetype essential age for Radha and Krishna. So from our perspective, definitely yes, because where you find the most vulnerable age, you'll be able to completely, drop the guard, open up, and have the deepest bonding possible, right?
Yeah, the
And
greatest reward.
even if you look at it from a human psychology, perspective, the really core essential value that humans are looking for, or at least most humans are looking for, is intimacy, right? Is very deep bonding. It's not superficial relationships, but deep relationships, deep love, deep commitment. And of course, that requires vulnerability. So you need a setting, right? And age is one of those settings that is so important to really allow us to be vulnerable. And so I think a beautiful meditation when we try to embody vulnerability is really to go back into that setting of innocence or of this crisis that you were describing, and then enter vulnerability in a environment that really is favorable for that. For example, right now we're having this tragic fires raging across LA, right? And there's so many beautiful reports of people helping each other and bonding very, very deeply. And it just reminded me of the war, Second World War, First World War reports where people have experienced extremely deep bonding, like almost never before. And some of the best friendships and marriages and business connections have actually been established during crisis, because that's exactly when you open up, when you let down your guards, when you are truly yourself, when you're vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? And so crisis is a catalyst. So it's a, how do you say catalyst or catalyzer in English?
Catalyst.
Catalyst. Yeah, crisis is a catalyst, It really brings us out of our cave. And that's why, by the way, in films also, like a typical Hollywood film must have a crisis. And that's
Mm.
because basic human psychology expects us. You have to go, the character, main character at least, has to go through crisis, and then only his or her true vulnerable self is able to come out.
Yeah, because crisis really challenges our sense of self. So again, in this beautiful picture that you're sharing with us, is Krishna's sense of self is captured within his peacock feather, his garland, his flute. So his whole sense of self is completely vulnerable and given here. So that's crisis to me is the opportunity to challenge our sense of self and to take off the masks. Like you're saying, let
Mm.
down the guard is dropping the masks. Arjuna dropping his bow. His bow was his mask. It was his identity. He dropped his identity and was just raw. Krishna here is
Mm.
dropping his identity and is just raw before Sri Radha.
Beautifully said, beautifully said. And I just feel like spontaneously sharing a little bit of something that I'm only going to be actually publishing in an upcoming book called Yoga of Empathy, because it's so important in this connection, is another important reason why Krishna is so vulnerable and raw here, or you can even say shy in his expression, is not that he feels shy about being a servant. He's extremely happy about being a servant, right? That would more deserve kind of an ecstatic expression, but there is something we need to understand that happens deep inside him during his initiation. I'm not going to go further into that. I mentioned it before. It's there in Nimritala Mahatmya. If you want to look at it deeper, he actually realized something new, right? I mean, there is no initiation without some new realization, right? Even for Krishna. And so when we hear about Krishna's deepest desire, we always hear about one of the three being to relish his own sweetness, right? And he can only do that from a perspective of a servant, from a devotee. That's why he becomes Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to relish that and to also relish his own sweetness. But once he actually relishes Radha Bhav, then he has a deeper realization that Radharani's bhav, which is not fully known to him before that, is much sweeter than his own self or devotion or whatever you may want to call it, his own personality. And so he feels like, oh, I'd rather, experience that more deeper. And now I'm also in a better situation to do that, because before that he couldn't, right? And also his own sweetness now has a new form, because now remember, now he is in the form of a servant, and that servant has an ecstatic manifestation. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Jagannath, these two core essential ecstatic manifestations, of Krishna in Radha Bhav, they are new to him now, right? And so he wants to now relish them and have their darshan and taste that sweetness. And so that comes with a lot of vulnerability, because he wanted to relish the Adi Purusham sweetness, and now he wants to relish something else, something fresh, something more deep. And not that the other wish was wrong, but he has now a deeper layer of desire, and that you can see here in this darshan. It's very, very vulnerable, and it doesn't even need much words around it. It's all in the act. It's everything is there in the movement, in the expression.
Mm. You're definitely stirring some thoughts for me. This might sound strong, but it's almost like being the prince of the family, right? For so long, for so many years, 13 years, 14 years, a certain kind of narcissism could develop where I'm staring into the water of my own reflection and I'm so attracted to my sweetness, how great I am as I know from my mother and my father and all of my friends and teachers telling me. Um, and yet that's a sort of static, uh, a sort of static vision. Now imagine looking into the reflection and it moves, in spite of you not moving, something new, something different. And that seems to be love. That seems to be, finding an equal in the world that tilts that narcissistic tendency. And if I could just say a little more, in the beginning, like I mentioned at birth, um, the emotions are pretty much out of control. The parent, the mother, the father is there to help regulate the emotion of the child. It can wake up screaming, and there's no apparent reason that you know of, but the job is emotional regulation. So I think now I'm thinking maybe we get to a certain age where we're partly able to regulate our own emotions, but we haven't yet suppressed, we haven't yet, beaten them down with strict reason and logic. There's a kind of vulnerability there where emotion is there, partly regulated, partly not, but then some reason is also there. Uh, that there is a sort of order and sense to the world too. And it's the meeting of these two factors that I don't know at that age that makes the vulnerability something that's controlled, right? It's not out of control, but it's just I don't know, just a nice, I guess, a nice balance between emotion, order, dysregulation, and regulation.
Well, one thing that was along these lines, Hugo, that came to me this morning when I was thinking about this topic
Mm,
is the relationship between, and also Maharaj talks, Swami Padmanabha talks about it in one of his classes on vulnerability, the relationship between risk, taking risk, which is, vulnerability as described by Brene Brown has three components: uncertainty,
mm,
risk, and emotional exposure. So this is how she describes vulnerability. So I was thinking
mm,
underneath all of that, though, there's a layer of trust and 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 unconditional love. So to be able to be vulnerable in healthy ways, it needs to be embedded within trust, within unconditional unconditional love. So we can see here that Krishna is encouraged,
mm,
although there's complete risk on his part, and Mahaprabhu is a personification of uncertainty and risk, and even Radha doesn't even know what's going to happen if he
Right.
does this, and she has to accompany him. Um, but there is a basis of trust and unconditional love. And I was thinking how it differs so much in this mood than in, like, say the the cowherd boys, like when they enter the mouth of Aghasura,
mm.
they could be thinking, oh, this is such a vulnerable thing. There's so much risk. They don't know what's going to happen. But the basis of Sakyarasa is confidence. So when they're like, yeah, we might die, but whatever, Krishna will take care of everything. So it's like they don't have the same kind of emotional vulnerability as in this particular relationship, because their confidence is totally different. Like
Right, right. I wonder, could we ever have this development in the Leela or even Sakya Ras without first Vatsalya Ras in some way? The parent bestows that trust.
Thank you so much for for your contributions. Um, I just saw that we have already spent 45 minutes, and we're going to open up the discussion soon. So I just wanted to stop to share the painting here so we can see each other better, and especially for the viewers out there. So, and I also actually promised in the beginning that I'll be saying something about the basic definition of vulnerability, because many people don't even know what it really is all about. So, and this is so important that we really get to the crux of it, because there's so much negative stigma involved here. And I'll just read you quickly what there is mentioned in the dictionary about vulnerability. The quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. Stop. All right. So that's not what we want, right? So that's why, people have this very kind of a negative understanding of vulnerability. They don't really want to go there. No wonder, right? And under synonyms, we have defenselessness, exposed, helpless, suspectful, undefended, unguarded, unprotected, and so on. And so who wants that, right? So really, I mean, examples. He was very vulnerable after his divorce. The troops were in a vulnerable position. Nobody wants to embody that voluntarily. Everyone runs away from it, right? Why should I want to go into that, right? So I think we also lack a positive approach to vulnerability in language. And so I was thinking we definitely need a better word for it in hopefully a time that comes soon. I just came up with some funny kind of name that I like. So I would call it rawesomeness because raw, to be raw is really awesome. To be vulnerable is really awesome. It's not negative. So if you combine the two, raw and awesomeness, you get to rawesomeness.
Yeah, I love
So
it.
it's and I would more define it kind of like the skill to take down one's guard and filters in contact with benevolent and empathic people.
Yes.
So because it's so important that the other is able to reciprocate that. Otherwise, you're just running into the hammer and then you don't want to be vulnerable anymore, right? So you have to first create the space, look for the right people to be vulnerable with, right? Look for the right sadhu sangha, real sadhu sangha.
Yeah.
Like you were mentioning also, Yugo Kishore, you should also expect that from your seniors. And if not, then well, that's not really seniority right here. It's not
Thank
really,
you
I
for
mean, I'm
saying
sorry
that.
to say, that's a vulnerable thing to say, but you
Yes.
should expect that from your
Yes.
seniors. Otherwise, if they can't be vulnerable, they can't really get to the crux of any tradition of pure devotion. So yeah, I just wanted to open up that discussion also a little bit about the definition and the need for really a new language or just a new programming around the whole definition of it. It's so important. Yeah.
And please, friend, take longer than the hour to get into more of the meat of your presentation. We're all very eager to drink what you've prepared for us. Our discussion can be postponed a few minutes. That's okay, I think.
All right. All right. So I'll try not to go too much over it and I'll dive right into it. So I want you to, if you need, to pull up the translation of the Shikshashtakam, and because I won't be going into all the bits of translations, and so I don't want you to feel lost. So in the comment section or in the chat, you'll find the link. Bhaktirasa has already posted it. And for those who are just watching on other platforms, they can just look it up in the database, right? It's very easy to find. So this is really what Mahaprabhu shares with us, the core essential instruction. After who is Mahaprabhu? Again, he's Krishna in the most vulnerable space, right? Krishna, who has now realized the true nectar of devotional service, Radhabhav, right? The zenith of prem, really. And so in that really vulnerable space. He's giving us this instruction, and usually we don't look at it from that perspective. That's why I thought, let's go through it at least as much as we can from the perspective of vulnerability. As an example, right? Cetadarpanamarjana, right? So that heart's mirror is being purified from the dust that's been accumulated there through the chanting, through Sri Harinam Sankirtan. And remember, what really started this whole thing of Kirtan for Krishna is when he was in desperation crying out Radharani's name. That was the birth of the Sankirtan movement in essence, you know. So very, very vulnerable. And now he's sharing that with us. And he's saying, oh, no, my heart is fully covered up with dust. And through this chanting, we can, you know, uncover the real self. You know, compare that to the common person out there in the world who's trying to show everyone, look, I am this and that, selfie this, selfie that, I'm a made man or whatever. You know, in this selfie age especially, it's all about, you know, who are you? Oh, I know who I am. No, I don't know who I am. Extremely opposite. I have no idea who I am, you know, and I need to first purify my conception. Cetadarpana marjanam bhavamahata vagni nirvapanam shreya kairava chandrika vitaranam vidya vadhu jivanam anandam buddhivardhanam pratipatam punamrita swadanam sarvatma snapanam param vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. The very first part I just wanted to, you know, talk about here. And yeah, I mean, in everywhere, in every bit you can find it. I just pick up a few. Nam namakari bahudani jasarva shaktis, right? So although, oh Krishna, you have, you know, put all your potencies in the holy name, still I have no taste for it. I mean, it's not like, oh, you know, I'm the great whatever Maharaj, and I'm teaching you now how to chant. No, I'm completely desperate. I don't have taste, you know, completely vulnerable, vulnerable sharing. And that's when bhakti is able to enter into the soft core of the heart. You know, Balaram again with the plow. What is he doing, Balaram, Guru? He's plowing the field of our heart to make it soft, to make it vulnerable, right? Then, yeah, Vrinadapi Sunichana, you know, lower than a blade of grass, extreme vulnerability, you know. That's how we should chant, right? Trinadapi Sunichana, Tarorapi Sahishana. What is a tree doing standing in the rain and, you know, defenseless, completely vulnerable? Lightning comes, showers of rain, cold, heat, everything, you know, complete vulnerability, unable to defend yourself, being completely exposed, being naked like a tree, yeah? Tarorapi Sahishana, Amanina Manavina, not expecting any praise of others, but giving glorifying everyone, you know, putting oneself lower instead of higher, you know, not in a way, of course, with that embodies low self-esteem. That's sometimes misunderstood, but in a way that really puts you in your vulnerable position where we really are, you know. It's not about learning to be humble or vulnerable, like, you know, Swami Padmaraji puts it nicely, but it's to actually learn how to be ourselves. We are eternal. We are eternally vulnerable. We just have to learn how to embody it. It's not something that is like an artificial superimposition on us. Nadanam najanam nasundarim, right? I don't want all these external things, right? I don't want to decorate myself with so many possessions, but why? It's not that I want to make a show also of being a renounced person. No, that's not the goal. That's again not vulnerable, not at all. It's an inner attitude. What attitude? The attitude of a beggar, right? I only want to serve, right? And that's exactly where we have to start with vulnerability, you know? So that Nadanamna Janamna Sundarim often is misunderstood. It's not about an external show of, I don't need that, I don't need this, I don't, trying to imitate the renounced orders, especially for most of us Grihastha. No, that's not what it's all about. It's an inner attitude of vulnerability, right? Where we can be beggars, even if we're millionaires or billionaires or what have you, right? Even that can put us in a humble position as well, even more so with children crying in the background or what have you, right? So my daughter is sleeping, fortunately. Yeah, I mean, it puts you in a vulnerable space, being a householder. And that can be just as conducive or sometimes even more conducive to bhakti than being renounced and not having family, not having wife and income or whatever. So that's the real sannyas, the being a beggar. Look at what sannyas vesh actually embodies. It's not about the external begging, it's about the internal begging. That's just a symbol of that, the sannyas vesh, right? So that we should be clear about when we speak about what sannyas is. Srila Gauragovinda Maharaj speaks about this very, very beautifully, by the way, if you want to hear more about that. And so it's about vulnerability, and we can embody that fully as householders. We can also be true sannyasis in that very sense. We don't have to imitate renunciates. We can be the essence of what sannyas embodies as well, and not in a lesser amount, right? Ai nanda tanuja kinkaram. Again, ai, oh hey, nanda tanuja kinkaram. Who am I? Oh Krishna, who am I? Kinkaram. That's the word of a servant in Sanskrit, kinkara. And I want to just break it down a little bit because it's so beautiful. It's exactly the opposite of the word ahankara, which means false ego, is kinkara. Ahankara, means false ego, but then kinkara means what doing. Kinkaram, what doing. In another sense, what shall I do? What shall I do? Again, complete vulnerability. I don't know what to do. You tell me what to do. Radharani, you know how to serve Krishna. I don't know how to serve. I don't know how to embody vulnerability, how to embody bhakti, kinkaram. So that really is like, again, very essential. And where do I want to be placed? At your lotus feet. I want to be the foot dust at the end of this shloka. It's all about being at the foot dust of Krishna. But remember, this is Krishna in the mood of being the servant. And that's the foot dust on Radharani's lotus feet is, remember in the darshan we had in the painting just now, that's what Krishna is looking at. That's the very position he's hankering for, and we're also hankering for, right? Nayanam Galadashradharaya. Torrents of tears cascading, from my eyes. When will that come? And all the other ecstatic emotions. Again, it's not the topic of a Sunday class. We don't want to present our supreme personality of God and in such a vulnerable way to people who now have to, learn the lesson that he's the supreme personality first. But yeah, that's who he is in the essence, and really that's what his core essential desire is all about, what he wants to embody and how he really is really happy. Yugaitang nimeshana, again, complete desperation. Yeah, a moment of separation feels like a yuga, feels like eons. Feels we cannot imagine the pain. But again, that pain is transcendental pain here. Vulnerability is full of bliss. We shouldn't forget that this is not pain like we experience pain, although it's real pain. It's really hard to understand that. You have to understand Achinta Bheda Veda Darshan. It's both simultaneously painful, but at the same time, it's also extremely blissful, right? I remember Indra Prabhu telling us that we cannot imagine how much suffering Krishna is going through. All the suffering in this world, like now we're experiencing desperation. Many devotees, they are fearing that they don't have a home anymore. Some of them lost already their houses, and maybe beloved ones are in dangers. But all the suffering combined doesn't come close to the suffering of Krishna in separation from Radharani, or the gopis in separation of Krishna. And that's vulnerability, that's complete vulnerability, this desperation that Krishna is cherishing him here, that makes his heart vulnerable. That setting of crisis that you were mentioning, is really, really, really helpful to bhakti. So we should not be afraid of it. We should welcome it if it comes, and learn how to embody vulnerability when it comes in a more deeper way. The final verse, concluding verse, Ashlishava padaratam pinashkamam adarshanan mahatam karotu. Yata tata vavidadata lampato mat prananatastu saivanapara. And here again, Yugal Kishore, how is Radharani addressing Krishna? You lampato, yeah? He's a debauchee, So you were mentioning, you said the word narcissism, or you can call it self-centeredness or whatever. But of course, this is Yogamaya making Krishna act in such a way that Radharani is able to embody the pure devotion in its zenith. Because, when we serve because Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is still conditioned. It's conditioned to the fact that he's Adi Purusham, that he's Bhagavan. And then if he's not Bhagavan anymore, then we're like, oh, wait a minute, excuse me, So that's not conditional service. But here, Radharani, she says, you're a devotee, but nevertheless, you can hug me, you can kick me, you can not show your beautiful face to me. You can break my heart. You're a devotee after all. Nevertheless, I will serve you life after life. Yeah. This is pure devotion. This is unconditional service. Extremely vulnerable. Everyone is telling Radharani, you're a fool. Why do you run after this devotee who is breaking not only your heart, but the heart of every girl in Vrindavan? Her mother warns her, everyone left and right warns her. Of course, except her very most beloved dear ones, near ones, right? But Radharani, nevertheless, she's like a moth flying into the fire. That's not what you're being told in primary school to do, just the opposite. So extremely vulnerable. And yeah, we should remember, this is all Yogamaya's play to invoke this extreme vulnerability, to enable Radharani to really embody this pure devotion, and also Krishna now in his mood of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he's revealing the core essence of his heart in this Shikshashtakam. He's sharing this very, very vulnerable space with us. And so if we, get to the crux of vulnerability in a positive sense, then we can find it everywhere, in Gaur Lila and in Krishna Lila. And in the Shikshashtakam, it's throughout. Every verse you find fully embodying vulnerability here. And so important, that we have that entry, that vision of vulnerability when we read, when we hear. And so, yeah, I wanted to share with you just a few, meditations on the Shikshashtakam in a very, very vulnerable way. There's more to say, but yeah, I stop here.
Yeah, that was super beautiful. And so many things came to mind as you were speaking. And it's just amazing. Like, just about separation. The first verse, Cheto Darpana Marjanam. So the dust. What is the dust? The dust is something that separates us from experiencing the divine and experiencing love. So it's that dust. So to cleanse all of that, Shrinam kind of is the crisis, that gets rid of the dust and cleans cleans that mirror and gets rid of those things that we put in the way between the in-between parts, those false shelters and false soldiers that are challenged, those false conceptions, those things that are challenged when we do encounter a crisis, and that we have built our sense of self around those things and they crumble. We get to reevaluate our sense of self. And I think that that is so much what vulnerability is about. It's about a newness of self, a newness of our sense of self. And that's Mahaprabhu's trajectory as he starts off as himself and ends up by the end of Shikshastakam as Sri Radha. This process and this crisis of vulnerability. And yes, super, super beautiful. And also the the payoff, let's say, for vulnerability. You kept saying, don't be afraid of it, don't be afraid of it, because we can see the empowerment as it's spoken of, vulnerability and empowerment, and the power of that empowerment is love, really. That's what it is. And although it seems like vulnerability is the opposite of empowerment, it's actually the vehicle for it to come about. So yeah, super beautiful points. I really appreciate what you're saying, Radhamadhav. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, and I love to hear about vulnerability in connection with empowerment. I think that really brings it home for me, and we have to keep on reminding ourselves, because we always have this false concept of what spiritual development, spiritual progress means. We are always heading for perfection, and we think that perfection is uh, going away from vulnerability and finally going to a safe space, but it's just the opposite, right? Look at Mahaprabhu. What is he doing in his final days, in the Gambhira? Extremely vulnerable, crying day and night in desperation. Nobody understands him, even his close associates. They're crying, they don't know what to do. Everyone is almost lost, right? He's running away, they're trying to capture him. He escapes and he wounds himself in terrible ways, and there's so much hurt and pain. And I mean, this is empowering. This is empowering, in the right association, of course. But yeah, this is what we should want to embody. This is what we should want to encounter. And extremely, extremely important that we should expect that also in our lives, not the opposite. Expect this vulnerable space and be ready for it, and make ourselves ready for it by being more vulnerable, and therefore search out the association where we can be more vulnerable.
Yeah, because really, what is meant by empowerment? Like, what is it? Does it mean we'll be able to control things more? No, to me, what's coming now is empowerment is really the ability to be ourselves in such a way that we can offer ourselves fully, the power to give ourselves fully. And that that takes the greatest strength and the greatest knowledge and renunciation, well, all those beautiful qualities that Bhagavan has, we that can come out in us, empowered by his power to be our fullest self in surrender, which is what we see exactly happening in Shikshastakam when he talks about, oh, I don't need these things, that things. Again, like you said, it's not about renunciation, but it's about giving up our sense of self that we place in those things. That's what needs to go. So to be completely vulnerable as the self, cleaning the mirror of the heart, as the self, and to be able to offer that, like Krishna did his garland, his peacock feather, his flute, our very sense of self on the altar. That's, I think, a hint, an idea of what empowerment is.
You pulled to my mind the word will, and sometimes we hear the two together, willpower. That, I'm thinking if empowerment is maybe that now I have the will and the desire to be vulnerable, what I already am,
Mhm.
right? There's a sort of requirement of vulnerability. Um, that's that's the necessity. That's what's placed on us. That's what we're made of. And if I can only actually have the desire to be who I am, you know. So somehow when you're talking about empowerment, it makes me think of will.
Yeah,
Mm.
I agree.
Beautiful. Yeah, and of course, as we all know, with chanting the holy name comes self-realization, you
Mhm.
know. So we actually sarvatma snapanam param, we're bathed in in a sense that we like, in the Christian
Mhm.
tradition of how do you call it?
Baptism.
Baptism, we get a new birth. We attain our real self, our swarupa. And that cannot happen unless we, completely open up and become vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this is self-realization for you in a way that's probably unexpected for many of us. But yeah, we should expect the unexpected in a mystic path, because that's what Yoga Maya's job is, to make it extremely exciting. And like we talked about it, it's she completely designs the environment in such a way that vulnerability is always maximized more and more and more and more the more we progress. Even for Krishna, what to speak of us. So we should expect it in our lives. And also how we approach the holy name in the Shikshashtakam, we see there's a progression of vulnerability. And the same thing in chanting. In the beginning, we hear, in the Sunday class, chant and be happy, right? It's there. It's true. It's Pratipadang Purnamrita Asvadanam. But at every step you relish nectar, but at the same time, that nectar also can embody just the opposite of happiness, in a sense. Complete tragedy and desperation and crying, and as Srila Gorgaminda Maharaj beautifully put it, just the opposite: chant and cry. You know.
Yeah.
So, and he said, I opened up a crying school here in Bhubaneswar to his disciples. So just the opposite, but both is perfect, both is right, and both wants to be accommodated, wants to be embodied. There's no one is better than the other, but vulnerability must be there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because there is no difference between the two. It's not that there's one and the other. Like you're saying, they are the same, just a depth to it. Like Gaur Leela and Krishna Leela. The deeper you go in one, the you'll come out in the other. So the same way with this happiness and this crying, the deeper you go in one, you come out in the other. That brings you to the other. It's
Mhm.
a wholeness about it.
Really beautiful. I love the way how we get to this word wholeness now, and it feels like the circle is closing here.
Beautiful. All right, so we can. I'm not sure if anybody out there has any questions. We can open it up. Sweta Dvipa and Krishnamurthy. I'm not sure if I'm saying it.
Krishnamurti Prabhu, yes, Hare Krishna, my dear God brother from nearby Malaysia has joined us. Welcome.
Do you have
Krishna
any?
Kripa, actually, his initiated name, Krishna Kripa
Okay,
Prabhu. Yes.
nice. Well, welcome. Feel free if you have any questions or something to add to the discussion. I'm going to put us in a gallery view so we can all participate here.
I can add in a moment that in my own life, when I've experienced extreme despair and depression, there's a sort of inwardness to it that you feel trapped by the inability to call out for help, to externalize all of the emotions that you're feeling. And yeah, it made me think, in just hearing a bit of the Shikshastakam, that it's important, being vulnerable is kind of turning yourself inside out so that others can see the pain and the joy too that's there. So I know that now more clearly than I did all those years ago. Maybe a number of years in my life where the idea was there that I had to present a certain way. I had to present that, yes, I have some knowledge. Yes, I have some Shakti. Yes, I have some position or some valuable thing. But actually, I'm not feeling that at all on the inside. I'm not tasting that. It was almost even distasteful to receive compliments at that time because I just didn't believe it. So it felt very hollow. And yet, even that felt somewhat inauthentic because I'm like, I should be accepting humbly what someone is giving me, right? So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's any other way but to externalize and show others in safe spaces what are the stumbling blocks that are in front of you now? What are the things that have been keeping you back from crying? What are the things that have been keeping you back from laughing or from chanting?
Yeah, for me, I've also discovered how that vulnerability is the key to to everything. Um, that because if we don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable with the right people who are receptive and empathic, the word that you brought up, the empathic God, empathic sadhus, who can receive us properly in the moments of vulnerability, in our rawness, in our rawomeness, that we it that's necessary for self-love. That there's the common saying that, oh, you can't love someone else until you love yourself. But I really don't think that you can love yourself until someone else loves you completely, unconditionally. And that can only happen if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable with that person. Because if we aren't vulnerable, if we don't show up internally naked, we will be hiding something. And it's whatever it is that we hide, is what we use to convince ourselves that we are not lovable. That if they knew this thing about me, so that is the part that's not accepted. And we won't believe their unconditional love. We'll think, oh, but if they knew, they wouldn't. So for us to be able to actually experience the redemption of unconditional love and the beauty, the empowerment that comes from being received in that way, then we cannot love ourselves. And if we can't do that, then we are not willing, we won't be willing to give ourselves to someone else because we are unworthy of giving ourselves to someone. But if we receive that unconditional love in context of our divine nature, then we can accept ourselves and offer ourselves to the feet of the divine. So for me, vulnerability is the key. It's the key.
Beautiful. I love how you connected vulnerability to redemption here, because it's part of an important entry into redemption. Really, it comes through vulnerability, and we often have exactly the opposite understanding, that we need to get rid of imperfection to be able to, reach the higher stages of devotion. But actually, imperfection or apparent imperfection really helps us to be vulnerable. And so often we see devotees as they progress, suddenly they enter some really, really deep crisis, really embarrassing things happening to them. And then only they seek shelter and they open up and they progress further, or they may have to finally change the association that wasn't favorable for them, or come really to deeper realizations with themselves, with their family, with their guru, whatever. So it's extremely important that we welcome this vulnerability in our lives. And I can also only tell a little story from myself, because here we're inviting others to be vulnerable, but we also should embody that. And so I was thinking in preparation for this discussion, how do I embody vulnerability right now, right here? What's raw for me right now? And I can just share a wonderful experience in this regard, because my sister, who was born as a male, has just undergone a transition into being a female. So she is what's officially called a female transgender female. See, I still struggle with the terms because I'm completely uneducated in this. So it's totally a vulnerable space for me. I'm totally under educated. I still want to educate myself better on this. And I just actually entered discussions with her more because, my father is from a Malaysian background, right? I'm here in Bali. So I just came from Malaysia, where my father is living. And so in Asia, and this again connects to the topic of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, because our tradition is centered in Asia, and Asia, especially Southeast Asia, is known for what's called shame. What's it called?
Base culture, shame culture.
Shame culture. Thank you. You
Saving,
covered for sure.
saving
Exactly.
face.
Yeah,
Sometimes they say
exactly.
saving face.
Yeah, right. So in this shame culture, we keep down the guards and we are unable to embody vulnerability. So for example, in our family, how that played out, they're all wonderful people, right? They're not like they're very soft-hearted people, especially in Asia. People who know Asians, they can, understand how soft-hearted they are. But because of this shame culture, they're unable to open up, they're unable to share vulnerably. And imagine in my family, she's been in this transition for I don't know how many years. I think more than 5 years now. And only recently we started speaking about this in my family. I thought she had been speaking about this with my father all along, but she hasn't. She hasn't. Just now, only after all these years, my father seeing her transformation externally and internally, right? Witnessing, but no discussion happening. So just an example of how the opposite of vulnerability is keeping us away from really doing what's needed, deeper bonding. And now that we're having these conversations, new bonding is happening, and you feel the sparks of love in the air, and it's exciting, and people are crawling out of their snail houses, and that's vulnerability for you. And so her vulnerable space is really creating an atmosphere in our family that allows us to bond deep. Beautiful. Yeah.
That is so awesome. And again, it kind of speaks to what empowerment is. It's love. It's coming in contact with other through deep bonds of love. That
Mhm. Yes. It's almost like saying that vulnerability is simply the need for love, and empowerment is I'll just put it this way, the feeling of being loved, the realization that one is loved. That's the empowerment. The vulnerability again is just the need of love, the need for love.
yeah. The feeling of separation. The feeling of separation and then the feeling of connectedness. Shweta, do we have something?
Yeah.
Very well, yeah. Pranams to all of you, and thank you so much for this beautiful discussion. Radhisham, Radhamadhav, Prabhu, so nice to see you.
Happy to
Yeah.
see you too.
Yeah, as you were talking about the Imlitala and the entrance to Seva Kunj, I remember that time you taking us through that back entrance. It was so beautiful, like really. And that was really the first time I was visiting Seva Kunj. Like I've been to Vrindavan a few times, but it was like a secret, you know. So yeah, thank you so much for
Well-kept
that.
secret.
Yeah. Yeah, so wow, like so many things came to my mind. And also, you know, this is one of my favorite topics, and we've been talking about it recently also in our Sisterhood Sangha. And exactly what we were saying about chanting, you know, like vulnerability is the key to, like, you know, chant like properly. Yeah, but one of the things that, like, you know, really occurred to me, kind of like a light bulb that went off, was when you were saying how, like, Lord Chaitanya and Lord Jagannath are like more vulnerable forms of Krishna. And then it occurred to me how, like, we often hear like Lord Jagannath is more merciful and Lord Chaitanya is more merciful, but I never really connected, as in, like, never understood why. You know, it's more like, okay, Jagannath as a form is merciful, so we anything you ask or, like, you know, you worship, he's gonna, like, you know, he's easily like melting. So yeah, when you were speaking, it like occurred to me, that's what it is, you know, like when we are vulnerable, like even ourselves, we feel like so much more kind and compassionate and loving towards others. So like I was kind of relating that even for Krishna, then that must be the case, right? Like with Lord Jagannath and Lord, like, Chaitanya, you know, them being the most, like, more vulnerable forms of Krishna, like they are more merciful. So it's like, wow, now, you know, I could connect that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah. Yeah. Please finish what you wanted to say.
Well, it's slightly a different thing. So if you want to say something about this, like, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to say something in regards to Jagannath, and then I'll let you speak more. Because you were talking about Imlitala, and it's so interesting because in the Imlitala temple, Jagannath is hiding there. Probably you didn't see him because he's so small. He's like this small on the temple in Imlitala, but he's there. Okay, small deity of Jagannath is there. And then again, if you go to Sevakunj, there is you know, Sri Krishna Chaitanya mission, where again Jagannath is there. And even in the Sevakunj temple, every day they sing wonderful kirtans, and one of the most sung kirtans there is one beautiful Brajavasi kirtan where they actually address Krishna as Jagannath. And so Jagannath is very much present there as well in a very hidden form. And because it's all about the mood of seva, once Krishna is in this mood of seva, this is the greatest fulfillment of for him. And Jagannath, and this really we have heard from Srila Gauragovinda Maharaj, not only Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the embodiment of Krishna in Radhabhav, but also Jagannath. They are both Mahabhav Prakash. They are both the very manifestation of Krishna being in the ecstasy of Radharani. And I had the great fortune to be serving Dr. Fakirmohan Prabhu, a wonderful Vaishnav, who was in Bhubaneswar at that time, who is one of the greatest scholars in terms in relation to Jagannath and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, especially with in relation to Orissan Vaishnavism. And so he explained to me that there is actually a scripture called Mahabhav Prakash, written by Kanai Kuntya, who was direct associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Orissan language. And so I was able to trace that out, and it's really mentioned there that Jagannath is also Mahabhav Prakash, and we'll be also publishing that in the upcoming book Yoga of Empathy. and so many wonderful relations to Jagannath, because Shweta Radhika, just one more thing I wanted to say about Jagannath. Just imagine, the vulnerability of Jagannath. He is like, he cannot move anymore, Like, we know that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the moving Jagannath. It's mentioned in Chaitanya Bhagavatam, but then Jagannath is the same ecstatic Lord who cannot move. He's so ecstatic, he's frozen, he's molten, and now he completely depends on the mercy of his devotees to bathe him, to dress him, to feed him, and that's what he wants. He wants that. Wants to eternally, yes, he wants to eternally be in that position and relish that. It's something that we would be running away from. We don't want to go back to being babies, but no, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has the second form where he has the same ecstasies, and he wants to be in that very vulnerable form to accept the service, but in a very vulnerable way, right? And so, I mean, he cannot blink with his eyes. They're always open, and he's always having darshan with his beloved devotees and relishing their nectarian devotion. And yeah, so thank you for mentioning about Jagannath, because there's so much more to say about Jagannath and the connection to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu here. But yeah, I wanted to share a little bit, and please continue.
Wow, you made my day with this sharing. So beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, well, the other thing was kind of what I was just reflecting on, like how I feel about being vulnerable, and like, the moments when I have been vulnerable with like people, like many a times in case of my family, where I've felt like the response wasn't as I expected and felt a bit hurt, and that I see now in places where I can be vulnerable makes me anxious until I receive the response, and then it's like just going through that anxiety, and like even though I have seen it to be a safe space, I still have that fear, so like I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's it might take practice or time, like as it goes it might get better or something like that. But I'm thinking this could be the case with many, that because we've had experiences of like being vulnerable and being hurt, then even when we are in a safe space, it would take us some time to actually develop that trust and be completely vulnerable and feel free.
I agree that there's a relationship between trust and vulnerability. And the amazing thing is the ultimate, it's like the ultimate risk, where they're like, for the gopis, they risked everything and they had absolutely no idea what was going to happen. Krishna wasn't the person to be trusted. They already knew that. He had messed them up so many times before, but it didn't matter. Just like at the end of Shikshastakam, it doesn't matter. You can break me. You can do this. You can do that. Because there is that unconditional love that is the basis for all of that. Even though it might not be seen and they aren't experiencing the complete confidence, like I brought up about the cowherd boys, they experience complete confidence. So their vulnerability, it looks very, very different than the gopis, because they can't be confident because Krishna is such a rascal. But it doesn't matter to them. They're willing to risk it all, and they get the greatest empowerment that comes from that. But yeah, it's like it is the development of trust until such a level of trust that it doesn't even look like trust anymore, and it feels completely not there. That's the paradox of spiritual life, I think.
That's exactly the question that's beating in my mind, is how, where does that confidence of the gopis come from to continue on? I don't know the answer. I don't know what that's based on. You know, I can only try to abstract away from the mythos and think, okay, well, these are people and they're depending somehow on other people. You know, usually there's some interdependence that grants us that empowerment. But what is it based on? You know,
Mm.
I can't literalize the myth too much. I'm sure I would end up saying something wrong. So where does that sense of trust come from for the
Mm.
gopis specifically?
Very, very deep and important question, Yugal Kishore. Thank you. Yeah, it's a very big topic. You know, we can't really do justice to it in a small format here, but I would recommend reading The Embankment of Separation by Srila Gaura Maharaj in this regard, if you haven't already read it. And there Srila Gaura Maharaj, he beautifully talks about how the gopis are bound by love, and this is called Asha Bandha. Yeah, they're literally bound, bound by hope, Asha Bandha.
Mm.
And they are so much bound by it that no matter what Krishna does, he cannot break it. And even if you know, hear about the very definition of Krishna Prem in its essence, and of course in Madhurya Ras, this is reaching a zenith. Then in Ujjvala Nilamani, Swarupa Goswami, he defines prema as the love that cannot be broken, even if everything adverse happens, you know, like, so that really is unconditional love, right? But then again, be careful, you know, you don't want to imitate that unless you're in a safe space and in the proper association, and unless you're really offering that love to someone who deserves it. And so important, because so many devotees open themselves up completely to people who don't deserve it, and then it's the most painful experience you can have, and hope is shattered. And for a right reason, we have hesitation when it comes to opening up. So we should also remember, it's not that we should suddenly, you know, open up our hearts in a premature way to people that don't deserve it. And so ultimately, you know, it all comes down to sadhu sangha and learning the art of sadhu sangha. We need to really know who is trustworthy and who is worthy of, you know, having sadhu sangha with, and then how to do that. And of course, if you look at how Radharani, you know, is being mentored by her gurus in Vraj. There are so many gurus. She has, Krishna has, everyone has in Radharani. Ultimately, Yoga Maya, Purnamasi Devi is the guru of all the Brajavasis, right? So she or they nurture them, and they teach them who is trustworthy, and then they can open up. And only then, in that space of deserved vulnerability, that Ashabandha makes sense, not in an environment that is not favorable, and that is not compassionate, you know, and that is not empathic. So very, very important question in both ways, you know, in for us sadhakas, but also for the siddhas, for, you know, for Krishna and Radharani. It's very telling in both ways, you know. I mean, why should someone, you know, like, really, it's literally like flying into the fire like a moth. Why should someone do that? Doesn't make sense. The world out there doesn't teach us that. Teaches us the opposite for a reason, right? Because this is the world of exploitation. You can't be vulnerable out there. You'll be completely bulldozed to death, really. And so we, again, you know, if we open up to the wrong people, bam, we run into the hammer again and again. And sadly, this happens in the devotional community as well. So what is sadhu sangha? You know,
That hope, that sense of hope is Thank you for that. That's so nice. We don't talk about hope that much that I've
Mm,
heard in Gaudiya circles. It's a very popular expression of love in Christian circles that I know of. But
mhm,
not so
mhm.
much do I hear about it in Gaudiya circles. And it gives me the image of, these gopis they have each other, they're relying on each other. It would be much different if the Leela was simply just Krishna and Radha only and
Yeah,
no other gopis, right?
right. We
Um,
can't imagine that. Like, I can't.
right, right. And yet somehow that question comes up in our theology about Svakiya or Parakiya, you know.
Mm,
But the hope that's shared between the gopis, that seems to be maybe the foundation uh of trust, you
And
know.
mm.
Tadatmya, they have
Yeah.
that oneness of heart. And when the gopis heard the flute call, they didn't know that the others heard it as well. So it's not like they're thinking, well, at least the other ones will be there. So when I go there, we can commiserate with each other. No, they were all willing to risk everything they had
Mm,
individually. And then when they got there, then it's like, oh, I'm not alone. So they were able to bond together, but they weren't thinking, well, I'll go if she goes. It's like, no, they're gone.
mm,
And I was thinking too that, like, you asked, where does this trust of the gopis come from? I just couldn't help but think it it comes during our progress in bhakti. Our trust in the Lord develops here on out. It's not a separate thing. Like once we get there in this package deal that will be handed our Sarup, trust is part of that package, but everything is developed along the way, along our journey. So w without our developing trust, beginning since time immemorial, then
Yes,
that's where it comes from. It comes from actually developing it
yes.
ever forward.
And Radhamadava, you mentioned that there's guru there in Vrindavan too. And
yeah.
even in this world, of course, if we didn't have our teachers,
Yeah.
it would be very trust would not seem to make sense at all, right? They're
Yeah.
already
And how
giving
can you,
selflessly.
right? And I mean, how can you trust if you don't have a place where you can put your trust? Because, I mean, it's not a Leela after all, and they feel like we feel. Actually, it's we feel like they feel, but in the poetic sense, is they feel like we feel. And so we would also feel desperate if someone would treat us like Krishna does. We would also need support, you know. So they also have a support system there. They have their Sakis, they have Purnamasi Devi, they have their elders, their seniors, so many ways how they can actually, find support in their daily life. And without that, it wouldn't be possible. And like you were saying, Bhakti Rasa, it really is about the development of bhakti. And in that development, especially for us as sadhakas, trust hope develops and refines itself. So it's all about an increasing of, like in our terminology, we use the word shraddha. Like the more shraddha, the more faith you have, the more your bhakti increases. But it's all really an emanation of the Hladini Shakti, becoming more and more embodied by you. And so those are all different aspects, be it faith, be it vulnerability, be it hope, right? So it all comes down to that. And that really is being nourished by our chanting, yes, by our own sadhana, by our service, but also by our seniors, very, very much. Yeah.
Yeah, and you also mentioned, Yugal, about vulnerability also creates this necessity for service. Like you mentioned also, Radhamadhav, about Jagannath, how he's just standing there and he's depending on his servants. So that's what vulnerability does. Also, it creates opportunity for us to render service.
Mm,
It's a necessity for
yes.
like the
Yes.
goal, the friend
Through
together.
through the empathy that you mentioned, right? I'm feeling what you're feeling. I don't, not only don't I want you to feel that, but I have to feel it first. So I can even understand what your needs are.
Yeah.
That's so nice.
Did you have some more
Yes,
Swetadweep? No?
Krishna Kripa Prabhu,
yes, Hare
if
Krishna
you want to,
Prabhu. This is
Hare
a
Krishna
beautiful
Prabhu, please
Hare Krishna
share a
Prabhu.
few
Can you hear
words
me?
with us, or maybe Didi is there as well. Whoever wants
No,
to say something,
Didi
most
gone to
welcome.
sleep. She's working tomorrow,
Okay.
but she's gone to sleep. But I love this topic. This is a beautiful topic, vulnerability. But there's something I was thinking. Generally, a person is vulnerable when they are helpless. When they're helpless, when normally we connect it to the mood of separation. Helpless cry and separation. But when you look at this pastime, when Krishna and Radharani, um, they are not even the mood of separation, they are together. But it's so powerful, even in this situation, Krishna is still so vulnerable. He's still crying, even even when he's still union with Radharani.
Yes.
So, Prue, can you please explain about this pastime? How did he crying even when he's together with what it was?
Yes, a very, very beautiful question. Yeah, Krishna Kripa Prabhu, thank you so much. Um, exactly in that darshan, in that picture that we saw, I cannot really say what the painter intended to express. To really do justice to that, we would have to actually ask the painter. And I think his name is Kartik Das. He wrote it there at the bottom. And then he also included a verse there from the Gita Govinda, which he wrote in Devanagari. Dehi Padapalava Mudaram, right, which is the most famous verse of the Gita Govinda. Oh, Radharani, please place your soft lotus feet on my head and thus free me, from the fire of Cupid, relinquish the fire from Cupid. In other words, free me from the fire of separation, from that very vulnerable space. Of course, Krishna, wants to again meet Radharani, but then the wonderful thing that happens in Seva Kund, which is beautifully expressed in that painting, is there comes a new dynamic. Because Krishna goes through a transformation not just externally. He doesn't just go through the ecstatic transformation as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and as Jagannath, but internally as well. His entire soul is completely transformed. Of course, it's not different from his body. We shouldn't have that wrong understanding, but his very conception, his very vision is completely changed. And hence, when he again meets Radharani now, he meets her as a new person. And that's so beautiful that in our darshan, although Krishna is the oldest person in a sense, he's ever fresh, Nitya Nava Yovana Kishore. He's the eternal fresh youth, ever fresh at every moment. And hence at each and every moment they're experiencing each other new. When they meet again, sometimes Radha and Krishna, they're like, who are you? Like,
Right.
I'm so attracted by you, but they don't understand. And that's what creates the excitement. In Yoga Maya, she is the mystic person who arranges for all that ultimately. And so we have to understand that in this union, it's a very special union. You see, it's not about the enjoyment so much in their union, in the sense of they're enjoying Ras Lila together, or they having a very secret encounter in the Kunja, and only the most intimate Sakis and Manjaris are able to even have darshan of that, what to speak of entering, but it's really about those refined relishment of vulnerability, where one completely opens up the heart that is so vulnerable that they can't even look at each other's eyes directly. I mean, you see, it's so beautiful in that painting. And so we have to understand that now they're together, but they still remember everything. They still remember the separation. They still remember the bliss they experienced in that separation. They still remembered how their heart was torn open by these crises they went through, different types of crises in every Lila, a new one. And then a fresh coming out from that vulnerable space. Now they happen to meet again. And they emerge from that samadhi as new persons. And it's a very shy moment. Again, it's still vulnerable. It's like, they're seeing each other with new eyes. It's a fresh darshan. And that's completely shy. Like it's like their first meeting, really. Yes. And that's why they're so shy also, that's why there's another reason. There's unlimited layers to it, but there's another reason why they're shy, because they're new, they're ever fresh. They're in one sense, they're really meeting each other anew, like for a first time. And so, yes, they are in union, but they're also still in separation. It's like a liminal space. It's like they're together and yet they're freshly together. It's not like, oh, now they're meeting again and okay, what are we going to do today? Not like that,
Remote thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to say on this, but I don't know. I was just
feel like the union
inspired
is
to
ever
say that. But
fresh.
Krishna Kripa Prabhu, maybe you can ask more, or you can say, what you would like to hear more to make it more clear.
Yeah, I remember this saying of separation in union. It's like you are literally crying for the ever fresh experience, the ever fresh love that is keep continuing. It is something like that. So although Krishna is with Radharani, but since that love is ever fresh, so he's still crying. I think I heard a
Yes.
lecture from Srila Guruganda Maharaj on this subject matter.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's many pastimes where this apparently contradicting dynamic actually comes out very beautifully. And yeah, like for example, um when Madhu Mangal he tells that the Krishna bee is or Madhusudan is gone. You all know that pastime, I think, and then Radharani understands it to mean that Krishna is gone, and she starts to cry. Deep separation, although she's sitting on the lap of Krishna. So externally there is sambhoga, there is union, but in that union there is viraha, and it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful because it's that rawness, that vulnerability. How much you love someone is really, really only shown in how much you can cry for that person, not how much you can be happy in that person's presence, because you may just want to be in the presence to enjoy, right?
Right.
But when you are in need, when you're in desperation, when someone leaves you and even hurts you, mind you, that is important too. If you still cry for the person unconditionally, then you are able to express your true love, So there's sambhoge viraha, there is viraha in sambhog, in union, there is separation in union, but there's also the opposite. There's virahe sambhog, there is separation, there is some virahe,
Union and
there's
separation.
yeah, so there's union in separation and there is separation in union. Both are there all the time. And they also nourish each other. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Do you think that has something to do also with, again, Tadatmya, the oneness of heart and how their identity is really found within the other? So when Krishna appears different, then the devotee's sense of self also responds, reciprocates to that, and then it just keeps going and never-ending newness, like you were saying again, that the sense of self and the identity of the self in the other. And if the other is changing, then our sense of self is also changing. And then that creates such a ongoing dynamic.
So important. So yeah, very beautiful. Yeah, I think this is extremely important. Like you're saying that, because especially in terms of Radha and Krishna, they're the complete counterparts, right? Absolute complete counterparts of each other. And so when one changes, the other also realizes their own selves in a fresh way. And really, that's what's happening to all of us. When we encounter new circumstances, we encounter ourselves in a fresh way too. Like I, for example, when I'm now meeting, my sister in a complete new way, I'm meeting myself in a new way. I have to educate myself. I have to be vulnerable. I have to learn so many new things, and I have to embody someone new also, right? So yeah, it's really important to see that this change is eternal and is happening all the time, and we shouldn't be afraid of embodying change. Nowadays, people are, so much afraid to change patterns, to change whatever external frameworks they were given when it's needed, because they don't realize how much empowerment comes with it, how much joy, how much bliss, how much realization comes with it. When we step outside of a framework and we get to know ourselves in a fresh way, in a new environment with new people. And that's exactly what Radha and Krishna are experiencing every day.
Yeah, exactly. That's the empowerment to step into a fuller and newer self. We are empowered to become in the process of becoming. So, yes, so beautiful. So Rasangi has joined us in this conversation.
I've been listening for an hour or so on YouTube and responding to all the amazing things I've heard. This is like epic and amazing, I must say. And I just have a question. I know it's late and we have to get off, but what is it? What kind of grace is it? What do people have to do to get to the point where this world opens up to them? This opportunity opens up to them. This where you're kind of scooped up into a plane where this is happening, this kind of real genuine sadhu sangha, where you're embraced and loved to wholeness and healing. What is it that's an amazing thing? And maybe we can't have time for it now, but I just can't help but think that there's something really special to be understood there. Where does our heart have to come, or our head have to come to be recipients of that amazing, amazing gift? And do you just have to be
Your willingness to be vulnerable. That's where it comes from. Your willingness to be vulnerable.
And you just have to be devotees of Krishna, or others are also experiencing that loving embrace and that personal guidance as well. Other faith-based.
Oh yeah, totally. This is a universal principle, just like love is a universal principle. And it doesn't stop with Vaishnavas or Gaudiya Vaishnavas. It touches everyone. And in fact, I've learned a lot about vulnerability from so-called non-devotees. And, sad to say, many times non-devotees are able to embody vulnerability even better than devotees, because devotees are so much attached to security and to perfection. They have a complete
Certainty.
wrong understanding of what perfection is. And so sometimes you have to just step back and say, wait a minute, I'm not able to open up here. Better I go somewhere where I can open up and be able, where I can embody vulnerability. That doesn't mean I don't have devotee friends like all of you, where I can open up, and be vulnerable. Thank Goddess, I have that. But if I wouldn't have it, I wouldn't be shy to step out and say, to my friends who are not devotees, and can we have a chat together? Sure. There is no boundaries to it. Absolutely.
Brené Brown, she's like the guru of vulnerability,
Yeah.
not a Krishna devotee.
Yeah. Yeah. Good example. Yeah.
And thank you, Rasangi, for coming over here. Usually I'm better at moderating the YouTube, so I see if questions are coming there, but we appreciate you making yourself, vulnerable, bringing your question to the table, to the fire.
Being seen, showing up, and
Yeah.
being.
So many things came up, and I was just excited to repeat them. I'm going to look at it again. Amazing little just quotes that are so powerful came from this time together. So thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
Is there anything else, Nitai, you came on?
Nityananda Prabhu, my heartfelt pranams, brother. Please welcome Nityananda Prabhu from Bolivia. He's a good, very, very dear friend of mine. We've spent a lot of vulnerable time together. So I'm very happy to see you here. If you want to say a few words, I'd be delighted, but maybe you're just able to listen. Anyhow, I want to connect with you again, and I'm happy that you're here present.
Yeah, thank you for joining. All right, is there, we are over 2 hours now. So is there anything else that anyone would like to share to kind of that might feel unresolved, or we need to pull a little bit more? Are we happy? Do you feel complete, Radhamadhav, for the moment?
I feel complete. I feel vulnerable.
You've stoked the fire with us today, so we thank you so much. We appreciate you so much, and we definitely look forward to more excavating these topics.
Yeah, maybe another time we can talk about hope.
Wonderful.
All right.
I came up with that hope against hope. I don't want to go in, we can't go into it now, but hope against hope is a big thing, right? In the devotee community, but
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think we have any idea what that even means, but
I know, right?
So Rasangi, that's your topic. We'll have you on standby.
Oh yeah, right. Oh yeah, right. Thanks.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
That's a good one for a new topic.
Hope against hope. What the heck does that mean?
Wow. Yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much, Radhamadhav, Kishore, and Sweetadweep for joining us, Rasangi for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with our next guest, Radhamadhav Prabhu.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, wonderful. I'm looking forward to that.
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.